bunch of really gushing things about the project and all the people involved in it, and then I quickly realized that you all probably would have the most fun hearing from them. So I'm going to keep this short, but I'm going to try to orient in some way. So how many of you are familiar with the Illinois Answers Project? That is so promising. Thank you. The Illinois Answers Project? Okay, that's right. So we don't need orienting, yes? If you saw a neighbor without their hand up, try to orient. Yeah. But the project itself, how many of you have actually read the project or some part of it? I know it's massive, I'm so sorry. Okay, great. So basically, our newsroom turned our investigative skills towards evaluating certain responses to social issues that are related to economic opportunity and the ability for people to advance economically and what gets in the way of that, but also what's helping, the pathways that have been created to help people get towards economic opportunity, right? So we did that through evaluating very small topics like childcare and housing and healthcare, and many of the things that Tiff just talked about actually. And I think that's a large reason why we chose this venue. We felt like there was a lot of alignment there, and I'm really excited to be here. And I hope you all are too, and I hope you get to explore a little bit. With that said, I said I would keep it short. So I'm going to let you know that we have 4 storytelling events coming up for you. This part I did have to look at, sorry. We have Meredith Newman talking about childcare. We have Alex Nitkin talking about a pilot program to build granny flats in Chicago. We have Jim Daly talking about violence interrupters on the west side. And we have Claire Murphy. Oh, she's gone. Claire Murphy talking about student loans and a special program that allows people to relieve student loan debt and also buy a house, which sounds crazy, but it's real. So I'm gonna let them do that. But first, I'm supposed to talk about the question slips that you have on your chairs, which I know less about than Kayla does. So I'm gonna invite her up to ask you, or to tell you about it. I'm sorry, Lumina. Lumina's gonna tell you about it. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. So there's question slips on your seats. If you have a question at any time, please feel free to write it down there. We're gonna do Q&A after all the sessions. If you just wanna put your hand up, we'll come collect those and then ask them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Lumina. Expertly done. But first up, we actually have a really awesome gallery talk for you. If you saw the beautiful photos here, and on your seats you've seen the note cards, flip those over, you'll see the illustrations that made this project make sense together. So that was done by our brilliant illustrator, Corey Lynn, who really conceived of how these stories all connected in a brilliant way that none of us would have been able to do. And put them all together for us. We have Akila who really helped these stories come alive, and they are going to come up and talk about their decisions and the process of creating all of that with art. You guys can come up together. I think there's one over here. This is going to help. I'm so sorry.
Hi everybody. Hello. I'm Akila.
And hi, I'm Corey.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hold it because I'm short. Do you want to just introduce yourself really quick and then we can go into mine?
Yes. Hi everybody. My name is Akila Townsend. I am a born and raised Chicagoan and a photographer, and so I've done all the photography for this project.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Corey Merlin. I'm an illustrator, and I think I'll talk a little bit further since my slides seem to already be up here. So I was brought onto this project to be the illustrator after working with Crystal. Thank you so much, Crystal. On a couple of other projects for Illinois Answers, working on smaller explainer pieces. And Crystal, of course, was like, would you like to come be on a project where you as an illustrator come to like weekly writers' room meetings to talk about like 5 to 8 different articles all the time? And I was like, sure, that sounds awesome. So that is what brought me onto the project. Let me see, you can go to the next slide. Awesome. So I created the illustrative elements for the project that accompany Akila's photography. And I think my vision was to create illustrations that cover the concept and tie all these big themes together underneath economic mobility. And this was really challenging because if you've read any of the pieces, you know that there's such a wide range of different topics that were covered that have a variety of different challenges. And so it was trying to create a visual analogy that tied together some distinct but related challenges that our Chicagoans are facing all the time. And so I've revealed to you my sketches, which is a very vulnerable thing to be doing, because the way that I sketch is very similar probably to the way as a lot of people who are not professional illustrators also sketch. So this is like revealing my secrets. But some of the earlier concepts that we had talked about while discussing this together of how to visually unite these themes were a ton of different ideas, and some of them were like talking about like game boards and things like, oh, like we as residents, Chicagoans are navigating challenges all the time. And so people talked about the game of life, we talked about chutes and ladders, and those were all very clear themes that I think would have been good analogies. But there was something that I didn't like about using the game board because when we're talking about like economic mobility, I feel like games assume that there's a right way to play the game, and that the game that's being played is in of itself valid as a whole. And so that's not the position that I wanted folks to visualize themselves in. And so we ended up using a integrated kind of like roads with barriers idea because navigating infrastructure is something that people do every single day. It's something we're all familiar with. And I think we're all kind of a little bit more used to the idea of there's something that should be working, but because of sometimes natural causes, there is a hole in the road, or sometimes because of choices that other people have made, there are blockages to me moving forward. So I like this idea of both like sometimes natural, sometimes creative forces, and that being the anchor that we use for this project. So you can go next. I just wanted to show some of the sketches that I had showed people originally because I was like, it's very not normal for me as an illustrator to be able to be a part of the whole project. Getting to talk to Akila early on and like knowing what kind of focus you were going to do, and also to work with Cesar, who's the web designer on the project. Like we had talked about this idea of the illustration moving down underneath the article, but there's just something about economic mobility that the idea of moving downward with the illustration was just not going to work. And so being able to work out problems like that was really interesting and cool. I forgot to mention this at the top, but in addition to being an illustrator, I'm also a community organizer. And so thinking about how general framework of how we think about storytelling and the stories we tell about mobility are really important to me. So that was not critical to my role on this project, but it is about why I care about this suite of stories. Next slide, please. So something about using the barriers and roads concept let us talk about the different ways that people are navigating these barriers. Sometimes we are destroying the barrier fully, and sometimes we are trying to like lift ourselves and like navigate over it. And so these are just like little small doodles, but I think the idea of that there are all these different ways that people are navigating as we try to get safety and security, I think really resonated with me. Because like for the Smart Buy program, like there is a program that is designed to help lift folks up by removing their debt, but it is hard to access. Like that's a different way to think about than I think the violence interruption story that is a little bit more complex and has generational disinvestment that people are using a whole different suite of tools and care in order to navigate. So there's just so many different answers to this that I didn't want the barriers or the way people navigate them to look simple. Moving on, just seeing some of the sketches that happened along the way. It was Crystal's beautiful idea to turn some of the illustrations into road signs. You can keep moving. And here are just some of the ways that the illustrations ended up being integrated into the web experience. Very beautifully by Cesar, thank you so much. If y'all have seen on the webpage, the main one, that it's like the illustration is actually clickable and it shows all the different stories together in one big illustration. And then I think, this is the last slide showing some of the different ways that the illustrations were able to be integrated into the project. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this project. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Sheila.
All right. So I'm going to talk briefly about my approach to the photography for this project. As Corey stated, we were able to have weekly meetings. Sorry, that's better. Weekly meetings with the reporters and Corey so that I can get a feel for the direction for the stories. And to give you a bit of information about me, I am from the south side of Chicago. My maternal grandparents came from Arkansas and migrated here during the Great Migration, and they settled in Cookman Greens, and eventually were able to move on into entrepreneurship and have a record store, and I have a bachelor's degree, and so those are just some of the ways that the story is connected to me personally. And so anytime I start a project, I think first kind of internally about how these relate to where I am, how I'm feeling, my experiences, and maybe even some personal experiences of those around me or loved ones. So I started with also looking at some American iconography just to kind of orient myself and think about how the American dream has been sold to us in the media throughout history. And so those are just references that I have pulled before. And we awesome. We can start with that first one. So this is one of the images that I made with Andrew, who was a part of the medical death story. And so for my intentions with the project in general were to have the places where I photographed the individuals be a part of the story and kind of characters themselves, because the place has such a significant role in these stories. So so this was the hospital where Andrew had been admitted. And I personally had a very similar experience to him, where I fractured my knee, and as a freelancer, I paid a lot for insurance, and yet I wasn't covered for my medical bills. And so it wasn't quite as unfortunate, but I had been in similar circumstances, and so I kind of like put in my feelings and my experience into this by having it at night, because that was kind of how my crisis went. So. Yeah. And this is a part of the accessory dwellings unit. Keys, we can keep going. So, thank you. In this, as I shared, I wanted to have the location and the place be included in the images. We can keep going. This is Pastor Hatch, who I had actually that was the next slide. I had photographed his church and his nonprofit before, and so I am familiar with the work that he has been doing in the community and the West Side community. And so these are actually images from that project. I just wanted to bring that out because that also kind of informed how I decided to make his portrait, because I wasn't familiar with him, but I was familiar with his work. And so this is Pastor Hatch. This is the imagery for the gig work story. We have the lovely Camila, and in this, I just really wanted to bring out kind of an emotive place of how that experience can make you feel. And this is for the student loans story. This is Nicole Murphy. And so in this, I wanted for there to be a representation of the institutions and like this large, like looming thing over us. And so that's why we actually shot it at the Museum of Science and Industry. That's Brian Ransom, who is a part of the Violence Destructors story. And with this, it's also kind of centered on the location, and this, I thought that was interesting with the trash cans, because while we were shooting there, these trash cans were lined up, and this is the alley that he talks about where there's drug activity, and so they're trying to like barricade that area so that the residents can't even use their own alley. So that's what that is. And this is Reverend Robin Hood, who is an organizer, and who this is his aunt's house, who has a history with the reverse mortgages, and so he yeah, I forget one. This is Tasia and her newborn baby. She was only like a month postpartum, and so these images were very like intimate, and yeah, we shot these in her backyard, and yeah, and that actually is all of my slides.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, everyone. My name is Alex Aiken, Government Finance and Accountability Reporter at Illinois Answers Project. We are going to start off, fittingly enough, in this incredible venue talking about housing, barriers to affordable housing in Chicago, and barriers to the implementation of affordable housing policies in Chicago. And I cannot think of a better person to talk about that with than Marisa Navarra, who is Vice President of Community Impact for the Chicago Community Trust, where she oversees the Trust's policy agenda and strategic initiatives specifically surrounding efforts to close the racial wealth gap. Marisa was previously the Commissioner for the Chicago Department of Housing under pretty much the entire Lori Lightfoot administration from 2019 to 2023, which is a big part of the experience that we're going to talk about today, where she shepherded a lot of really big, impactful housing ordinances and policies through the City Council and helped implement them. Before that, she was Vice President of the Metropolitan Planning Council, where she oversaw the landmark Cost of Segregation report, which found that the racial and economic segregation of the city of Chicago actually cost the region, I think it was $4.4 billion every single year. So we are going to talk about accessory dwelling units, which was my humble contribution to this incredible project. Otherwise known as ADUs, granny flats, kind of a very modest affordable housing policy, but tells us a lot also about sort of what the barriers to affordable housing in Chicago are, right? So just to start off, what are ADUs and why are they illegal to build in most of the city of Chicago right now?
So thank you, and thanks for having me, Alex. And Alex was a really great reporter to work with through my time at City Hall, so thank you. Yes. Additional dwelling units or accessory dwelling units can mean the coach house that's behind a house. It can mean a basement unit. It can mean an attic unit. Any of those things encompass the definition.
Can we get the photo back up? I don't know who's controlling it. Of the ADU, the coach house that the Petermans live in. There it is.
Yeah.
Just in their backyard.
So that's like a super fancy house. They don't all look like that.
You too.
Yeah. I mean, some of them, my neighbor in North Lawndale had an old brick coach house in the back of their
There
yard.
were built a long time ago.
That were built a long time ago, and people still use, but they weren't, often under the radar and not legally.
So we're talking about a coach house like this, and it also is a term that refers to sort of unused basement or attic spaces, like that can be turned into garden units. So in, I think it was 2018, it was actually, before you were with the city, it was the Emanuel administration that said, maybe we should actually legalize them again. And I want to go back to that question of why did they become illegal to build these?
Yeah, so 1957, was when they were made illegal. And you know, the best I can say is that this was an era in which suburbanization was booming. And I think there was this effort to say, how do we make the city as suburban as possible? Well, we limit density, right? We will make this as much like that tract house out in the suburbs so that as possible, so that people can feel comfortable with staying here in the city and so on. And so it really was this outdated, you know, anti-density notion that we had then been carrying with us, which of course I do want to just emphasize didn't mean that people didn't rent out their basements or their attic or whatever. It just meant they didn't do so with any inspections or, you know, potentially they were unsafe and all kinds of things, right? So
yeah, this was an era when like slum clearing was literally
Yes.
a official policy of the city and the state, right? So 2018, 2019, the Emanuel administration says, hey, here in our policy agenda in the next couple of years, we should re-legalize these units to be built again. You come in and sort of pick up the ball with the Lightfoot administration. Lightfoot at the time was all in on this. We're going to legalize them. Tell us about your pitch to the city council, or why you wanted to allow people to build coach houses like this again, or convert unused basement spaces into apartments.
So this was I actually had an interesting experience with this one. We passed 9 laws in the 4 years that I was there, and this was one of the hardest ones for me to figure out how to talk about, because on the one hand, you gotta kind of sell it, right? And on the other hand, I was like, this isn't really that big of a deal. They just shouldn't have been illegalized ever. I don't think it's gonna transform any neighborhood. It's a gentle density step. You don't have to have a big public fight about a huge multi-unit building, you know, all of those things. And yet, so...
You said you don't need to have a big public fight.
I know. So here's where I was in affordable and community development for decades, affordable housing and community development for decades when I came to this role. I didn't think I was particularly naive, but this is an area where I learned that I underestimated. I thought this was a super no-brainer, easy peasy, we'll roll this out. We in fact introduced a citywide ordinance, and you would have thought that we were ushering in Armageddon in some places. Some folks were all in and super excited and saw this as a way, again, for them to help address some scarcity issues, a way to help create multi-generational living, a way to help, you know, cash-strapped homeowners have some extra income to pay their taxes, a way to preserve 2 to 4 flats, which we're super concerned about, right, losing, all of that. So I had some members of council that were all in, and some that were virulently opposed, and I would say the opposition was not a monolith. And so one part of the opposition came from parts of the city where there was a lot of concern about owner investors that were kind of buying properties before an owner occupant could do so, and they did not want to make it any more attractive to do that than it already was. So that was one set of concerns, and another one I would say was more like we bought into this suburban type area for a reason. What are you talking about? So we were able to solve for the first one. What we said, let me pause and just say what we ended up having to do. Although we introduced a citywide ordinance, it became clear that we could not successfully pass a citywide ordinance. And so we went back and created a 5-area pilot program with a coalition of the willing who wanted to do this. And we made sure that there was geographic distribution across the city, but it was, not what we wanted to do.
It was the way that I've observed, I think, pilots often get implemented in Chicago, which is, if you want it in your ward, you can have it in your ward. But if I don't want it in my ward, I'm not going to have it in my ward.
100%. And also the thing that we talked about, which is when we tried to give folks on council data about how this had happened in other cities, we ran into a thing that I found very common, which is Chicago is a unique snowflake of a city we could not learn from anywhere else. And so you often have to say, okay, we will roll this out in a smaller way, and we'll learn from it, and people can feel that it is Chicago learning, not learning from somewhere else. That's a comfort step, right, that you sometimes have to do to try something new. So that's what we did.
So 5 pilot zones: north side, northwest side, west side, south side, and southeast side. There were some additional restrictions on those south side ones. The pilot has now, it never ended technically, it's still in place. What have we learned since then about what's happened, about this policy in Chicago?
So the one thing that we did do to try to get at some of those concerns about investor owners was that we said on the south, southeast, and west side areas, you had to be an owner occupant in order to take advantage of it. So that was a thing we thought, well, let's try this. Let's get at this legitimate concern. The other thing that we did in those areas was to say there could not be more than, I believe it was 1 or 2 per block per year. And this was to get at this, we might be overrun by renters kind of fear. And so we, those were 2 things that we put in place in the areas where there were those concerns. In most of in the north side areas, it was no holds barred. So what we found was not surprising. After 3 years, as was mandated in the legislation, you had to come back and report on what had happened. 46% of those that took advantage of the law were owner occupied. And the vast majority of them were enacted on the north side. So I think that gets at kind of 2 issues. One is that there were a lot more restrictions in parts of the city, which cut down the number of users who could actually take advantage of it. That did not exist on the north side. But the other part is economic, right? If you don't have as much disposable income to drop on that kind of a coach house. It's not, and we did do some work. We did some work with neighborhood housing services to try to come up with some lending products to try to make it accessible for people. But it's an economic inequity issue, right? It's hard to get a loan to do that kind of a project. So if you don't have the cash on hand, it's just going to be a harder thing to enact.
So ADUs are now back in the news. This is super timely because we learned that next week Mayor Johnson is going to try to force basically a vote on a version of an ordinance to allow ADUs citywide. A lot of the opposition has been, or at least the most vocal opposition, has been from sort of the Bungalow Belt coalition you talked about. Alderman Marty Quinn said that it would be an all-out attack on the Bungalow Belt, allowing these to be built. Alderman Matt O'Shea said, well, I was really taken by one thing that he said that I wanted to ask you about, that yes, we have an affordable housing shortage, yes, we need more housing, but what about all of the city-owned vacant lots that we have? What about the south side, what about the west side? I cannot imagine a better person, as someone who literally oversaw a report on the cost of segregation, what do you say to that? Because it's something I heard a lot, like from Alderman. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is how our segregation has been maintained over the past 100+ years, is saying, well, each neighborhood gets to decide. And the government was that actually these are citywide issues. They need to be determined at a citywide level with local input, but not local veto power. And because otherwise we will continue to perpetuate that belongs somewhere else. Even something as simple as one rental unit becomes a specter, right? And the Trib just ran an article on this yesterday. It is super timely, in which it was, concerns about parking and garbage and school overcrowding, and that this would drive up investors from New York to, I don't know, crowded to Mount Greenwood. Which is just not something I am familiar with as a phenomenon. And so I think that this is where the kind of protectionism around, I bought into a neighborhood because it was a certain way. And even when I said in some conversations, like, this is not a mandate, this is enabling legislation. If most owners in your community don't want to do this, they won't. If this doesn't make sense for your community because this is not what they want. But I think there is this fear that, well, but what if it is someone from the outside, even when you put in the owner-occupant restriction.
So we're almost out of time. We can move on to the next round. Last question though, and it's a big one. What does the opposition to ADUs, something that, as you described, is something that's pretty modest, even the pilot has not created all that many units. What does that opposition tell us about the challenges of the project of closing the racial wealth gap, desegregating the city of Chicago?
Well, I think it's really illustrative about why it is such a challenging project. Because just when you think, oh, this is about density, and if we can eliminate fights about big buildings and parking lots for all the people that live there and all of that, and if we could just do this in a I mean, you could walk down the street and not have any idea that this new thing exists, right? And it will just be this tiny little intervention, and that even then there is a real fear-based reaction. And I am increasingly interested in how we help people move past their fears and into, a fear of the unknown, and instead to embrace what's possible about the unknown. I am increasingly interested in how we help people do that.
It's a great note to end on, or pause on. Reese and Navarra, thank you so much for participating in this conversation. Next up, we have Jim from Southside Lincoln to talk about violence interrupters on the West Side.
Hey everybody. I'm Jim Daly. I'm the investigations editor at Southside Weekly, and I contributed to this group of stories with Illinois Answers. And I wrote about violence interrupters and block clubs and police district councils on the west side of Chicago. You may know that this year, violence in Chicago is precipitously declining. It's at historic lows. It's very good. Now, the reasons for that are complex and they're myriad and they're probably not that well understood, but Mayor Brandon Johnson is taking lots of credit for the decline. And the reason he's doing that is because he's implemented what he calls the People's Plan for Community Safety. And it involves lots of people-based and place-based initiatives that are trying to tackle the root causes of violence. But this plan that he's come up with, the administration didn't come up with this top-down. It draws from a lot of things that are happening on the ground that have been happening in communities for decades. And Brian is one of the people that I interviewed for this story. Brian is a block club captain. He's a police district counselor in the 11th district, which is in East Garfield Park. He's a property owner there, and he has directly intervened in some of the things that have caused violence in his neighborhood. So we're going to talk about Brian's story. So you're originally from New Orleans. Can you talk about how you came from New Orleans to the west side of Chicago?
Yeah, so first, thanks, Jim, for having me.
Sure.
You're dope, man. So yeah, I'm originally from New Orleans. I came up here after too much school to work at Fermilab. I'm actually a particle physicist. I really enjoy my life. I really enjoy work. And really what it was is when I got off of work every day, I needed to be around people who looked like me. So I moved to Garfield Park, and that was interesting. There are a lot of similarities between Chicago and New Orleans. Great Migration, I think, is to thank for that. But yeah, I just wanted to be someplace that reminded me a bit of home. And that's how I ended up where I was.
And you told me you also wanted to grow wealth, and you saw the west side as a place to do that.
There are a few more reasons. So I used to work in climate science. So Chicago is actually one of the best places to be if you're trying to deal with climate change, right? And coming from New Orleans and dealing with Katrina, it was kind of a no-brainer. But also, when I was a postdoc, sort of being a postdoc is almost like being a medical resident, so you have a lot of education, but you don't really make a ton of money. So I was looking for some place to live, and I had lived in Naperville and I had lived in Aurora, but I wasn't very happy with that. And I wanted to live in Chicago, but there weren't many places that I could afford in Chicago, so I bought where I could afford. Yeah.
So when you were first looking at the house, there was some young men out in front of it. Can you tell me that story?
Yeah. So I would just, looking for a house is the whole thing. So I sort of canvassed a few different neighborhoods. I came upon this neighborhood in this block, and it seemed to be a quiet block. And I saw a couple of dudes outside, and I was like, "Hey guys, what's up?" And they were like, "It's chill, it's whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, but what's up?" Yeah. And they were like, "Well, we'd be out here, but we're not really out here like that. You know, it's pretty quiet, it's whatever. As long as you stick to your business, then you'll be okay. That was not the case. Yeah. Should I go into it more?
Yeah, please do. What was it?
Oh man. So it really became that there's like I wouldn't even say it's after a certain hour. It's almost like McDonald's. Imagine like having a McDonald's in front of your house, except what they sell are various types of Schedule I substances, right? That's kind of what it was like. And with that comes an element of lawlessness that most people are unprepared for. I consider myself extremely liberal, extremely progressive. But I would say that the way in which I had to rethink the problem once it was visited to my doorstep is very different than I think a traditional progressive would approach the issue, right? And of course there's some community organizing, there's obviously talking with your neighbors and people-based approaches, but there also are things you need to do to address the problem that I don't know if a traditional progressive would do. Like you do have to talk to the police, right? And I had been out there with the George Floyd folks being like, you know, ACAB, you know, F12, all that stuff, right? And then they got to a point where I actually needed to talk to the police and treat them like human beings in order to get some of our problems solved. And I had tried other ways and they were not effective. So being a scientist, you do what works.
Can you talk about one of the other ways where you confronted them initially? Because I believe that's sort of like a catalyst story.
Yeah, I mean, I confronted a lot of people. I was very upset. I work pretty hard to imagine going home, and it's not quiet because with the lawlessness comes many quality of life violations that many of us would not tolerate. And it would be like, I would go talk to them, and I'd be like, you know, why do you have your giant band in front of my house playing ridiculous music at 2 a.m? Like, you don't need to do that. Like, y'all could just move weight and it not be a block party. But they didn't want to hear that, right? So it got to a point where I was so fed up one night, I grabbed a lawn chair and I sat in the middle of the street. And if you know the block one, there's no way to drive around me. And I was like, look, if you guys are gonna be late, I'm not sleeping anyway. Y'all not moving anything until y'all quiet down. They did not like that at all. Now I do want to come in and make sure I am not a violence interrupter. I am a resident and a block club president. The reason I'm still alive is because of the violence interrupters, right? There were folks who were out in the community making sure that nobody touched me while I was doing this. And that's Institute for Nonviolence Chicago. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Yeah. I talk with those guys. I still see those guys. And they're like, you know, how you doing? I'm doing okay. I'm glad you're doing okay. Stay safe, you know? But yeah, it really was that one of the folks who had not been on the block, but who had been very rambunctious, decided that he wanted to assault me, so he did, and I had to go to the hospital. Yeah, I was worried I might lose my eye, but I still have both eyes, and I can see quite well. But that was really a catalyst and a turning point. We had organized the community so well that after that particular incident, we kind of went to the police and were like, okay, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this, we've done almost everything you told us to do, and we're still dealing with this, so how do we solve this? And then they started putting pressure on the situation and eventually cleaned itself up. But also, after that, a couple of other people had to die, and these were folks who I saw outside of my house every day, who I developed a relationship with. So it was pretty sad. Yeah.
What led you to organize the block club?
So what it really was is we all kind of had the same complaint. We were like, you know, why are we living in this neighborhood? We call the police all the time. And remember, I started out ACAB, right? So it took me 3 months of night after night after night after night interruptions of my sleep to be like, all right, we're not doing this anymore, right? And then I called the police once and nothing happened. And you would think that when you call the police, they're right there, because that's how the police always make it seem. That's not how it works in some of these neighborhoods. So, what was the rest of the question?
Just how did you come to form the block?
Oh, yeah. So eventually what we realized is that we had to basically engage in what is now known as the public health approach to gun violence, which is we had to beautify our neighborhoods. We had to come together and let folks know what our wishes were. Because I would go talk to guys all the time on behalf of my older neighbors who didn't want them in their yard, for example. And they would be like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, well, because I know her. And I wouldn't be able to say that had I not gone outside and created the block club to meet my neighbors and had not organized with them and talked with them in a meaningful way to understand their wishes.
And how many years ago was that initial interaction where you were put in the hospital?
Oh, think that was 2023.
Okay, so a few years ago.
Yeah.
Couple years ago.
A couple years ago.
And you told me the other day that some of these guys have tried to come back. So you got them to leave ultimately, right?
Yeah, so the whole situation is very complicated. Gangs in Chicago are like a whole sub thing that you can spend many years researching and reading about. There's complicated dynamics.
Yeah.
So the group that I had talked to and had known and had seen left, and also the other group who was not their group, but someone associated also left. And the new group came recently, and those were the trash cans you saw. They actually had changed strategies and set up in our back alley so that you couldn't see the camera that the block club had set up. So what we had to do was, again, basically rally the troops and be like, hey, we don't want you here. Like, we understand y'all are trying to make money, but can y'all do that somewhere else? And we got resistance, but eventually we organized. We engaged in many different ways of addressing the issue, like talking to the police, like organizing with the police commander, who's Johnny Tate, District 11, dope as well. And then the actual thing that changed things, where we got one neighbor to build a gate where they had been parking. And once they realized that they could not stay out of view behind the trash cans, they realized that that was not a good place to be for them, so they left.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
And then can you talk about, so in your position as a police district counselor, does everyone know what the police district councils in Chicago are? Raise your hand if you don't know, and I'll give you a real quick rundown. So in 2023, the city invented district councils for every police district. They're elected, there's 3 people per council. They interact with a citywide body and also sort of liaison between police and community. Is that sum it up pretty well?
That's perfect.
So, given your position both as a property owner in Garfield Park, a block club captain, you can bring the physicist in here too if you want, but and as someone who interfaces with policy as a police district counselor, where do you think there might still be disconnects between either the state or city and people on the ground?
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have been reading like Abundance, like Ezra Klein and stuff. I haven't read it yet, but I listen to it a lot. And there's an argument that goes through there where there is a disconnect between the policy that is passed and the policy that is implemented. And a lot of us in this room that have similar politics agree on what should be done. And then we go home after we get it passed in Congress or through the city council. And what needs to happen in addition to that is we all need to be paying attention to how that policy is implemented. Because that is just as important as the policy as is. And if you do not watch both with a hawk's eye, you will get bad outcomes. A lot of the things that we're talking about here, a lot of the things that are part of this entire Illinois Answers project are the second order effects of policy that we passed in the 50s and 60s. And we have not really sat down and dealt with how that should be implemented today. What has changed today, such that we need to make sure that people are well taken care of. So I would hope that all of you engaged in political processes moving forward, you thought not only about what needed to happen, but how that needed to happen, and centered people on the ground in that exercise. That's all I would say.
That's great, and we're out of time, so we'll leave it there. That's a good start.
Seek out these loans, both private and public, in the future. And we know that the burden of this long-term debt has created a financial paradox for many graduates, and it's effectively delayed major milestones in life, including starting a family, going to graduate school, and what we'll talk about more today, which is buying a home. So to address this, the state launched the Smart Buy program, which helps bridge the financial gap that has historically and continues to prevent many young adults and families from becoming homeowners. So Kristen Faust is Executive Director of the Illinois Housing Development Authority, which is the state agency that oversees the Smart Buy program. Thanks, Kristen, for being here.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I just kind of wanted to start by asking, a little bit about the background of IHDA and the creation of Smart Buy, but then also how it specifically works to address the connection between student debt and homeownership.
Sure. So we're IDA, the Illinois Housing Development Authority. We're your state housing finance agency. There's one in every state of the union. And our mission is the creation and preservation of affordable housing. And as such, We have an incredibly dedicated and committed staff of about 350 people who do housing policy and housing finance all day long. And as part of that, they work hard to, I think it was you talking about Ezra Klein, not just come up with the good idea, or to hear about the good idea, but then to implement it in a way that achieves the original intended goal. So, one of the needs out there we saw is, that we try to meet, is to help people become first-time homebuyers. So, you want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So Ida, and who's heard of Ida? Okay. So some of you might know us because we help people become homeowners with some down payment assistance. We also do multifamily, we do a range of things. But we want to create more first-time home buyers, and when we go out and talk to those prospective home buyers, and when we read the data across Illinois, such as the data that Claire put together and found, we saw that people were being prevented from becoming a home buyer, and there's a couple of top reasons. The classic one is saving for your down payments. So that's a classic one, and that's why we offer general down payment assistance. But in the last 10 years, in the top 2 and 3 reasons for people are not becoming home buyers, it's student debt. And so we really wanted to do something about that, because in addition to creating first-time home buyers, we were trying to create equity and equal opportunity across Illinois, and so addressing the racial wealth gap is also another interest and goal at IDA. And we know that home ownership is not guaranteed. It's not guaranteed to make you richer than anywhere, but it is really the best on-ramp for most Americans to build any kind of wealth. And most of us all have, if we have any assets, it's really in our house. And so helping people get on that road to home ownership is critical. And if there's a whole group of people now, it's not just about race, it's all folks who have this huge student debt burden hanging around their neck, is preventing them from becoming homeowners. That's going to shift and change what our society looks like, and who has the wealth and who doesn't. And so there's a lot of different angles we're hitting here in terms of creating a broader middle class, addressing the racial wealth gap. But really, what homeownership does is it just helps you put down roots in the community. It helps you get to know your neighbors. There's all kinds of benefits to homeownership. Definitely.
Can you speak a little bit about the eligibility requirements for Smart Buy, or how someone might qualify for that?
So we were seeing this challenge around student debt, and we're like, what can we do? And we had a little bit of money. and we were trying to figure out what to do with the money, and we were like, you know what? We just need to pay down the debt. It sounds, I think, to people in certain, I'm going to say, older generations, like, hey, they borrowed that debt, they should pay back their debt. That's what you do. That's what debt is. You took on that debt, pay it back. But I could tell you, the student debt that I took on and had when I graduated from college and graduate school is very different than the debt my daughter has. I didn't have to worry about that debt until I graduated and got a job, and then it started getting charged interest. And now the student debt you get, the day you borrow it, you're getting charged interest. So my daughter, who I taught about finance, is like, Mom, the interest is compounding and I'm only a freshman, I'm only a sophomore in college. And she's aware. It feels like a weight around their necks even while they're in college. So that's a little bit of my personal story about why I came to realize that this is not your student debt or your parent's student debt. We've set up a different system on how we issue and provide student debt, and it's not as favorable to the consumer. So we did some analysis. We saw that there was a lot of student debt here. We saw the average amount of student debt was around $33,000 a year in Illinois. We saw households of color, had a little higher amount, around $37,000 on average, and so we said, you know what? We're gonna offer $40,000 grants, and that's gotta pay off all your debt. And then we're also gonna give you, do our standard $5,000 down payment assistance. And if that then makes you eligible for your mortgage, because that's what was stopping you from qualifying, you're gonna be able to get into that mortgage. So, yeah, it's great.
So one of the key barriers to the student debt crisis is public awareness about programs like Smart Buy, right? And there's other, state-based forgiveness programs and federal forgiveness programs that people just aren't aware of, but that they might qualify for. How is IDA working to increase awareness about this program? I know now it's closed, unfortunately, but how are they working to spread awareness about the other opportunities that they have for student debt?
Right. So we ran the program 2 times, and now we're out of funds. It goes very quickly, usually gets used up in about the first 90 days. We work through lenders, that's how we do all of our down payment assistance and mortgages, and so we worked hard to advertise through our lenders. We also did our own advertising. And so through the 2 programs, we did help create over 1,100 new home buyers, and we're really excited about that. But it's not enough, and because we don't have any more funds right now, we encourage people, first of all, there are some, to contact your student loan servicer and understand what kind of debt repayment programs exist. Sometimes there are programs where you only have to pay a portion of your income. There are also programs available if you work for a nonprofit or a government agency for 10 years. There are programs out there that some folks know about and some people know about and some don't. So we do try to spread awareness about that now, is basically what we can do. Make sure people are maximizing the tools that are out there.
Yeah, that's great. There's a little bit of a time warning, so I'm just going to ask one more question. What would you say your advice would be for someone looking to buy a home in the future, in the next 5 years, but managing financial burdens like student loan debt? What can you best do to prepare for that kind of investment, would you say?
I would suggest, there's all these HUD certified housing counseling agencies out there across the state of Illinois, across Chicago and Cook County. Go online, make sure they're HUD certified, and maybe take a class. You go online and read up. You're going to have to start saving your money, getting your budget in order, and then research opportunities your employer might have. This is for down payment assistance or for student debt assistance. There is a lot of information out there. Our website, ida.org, ihda.org, has information on it about the housing counseling agencies. There is a path to home ownership. I really believe for anybody who's really committed, you can do it. I worked at a previous organization, Neighborhood Housing Services of Chicago. I mean, there are people who, for a lot of folks, it was a 2 or 3 year path. For some folks, it was a 7-year path, right? Because you hit bumps. But if you're interested in home ownership, there are organizations, including IDA, out there that can assist you and empower you on that path.
Great. Thank you so much.